This episode is brought to you by Merrill. We all have goals, and we all want to get to those goals, whether that's saving for a home renovation, that once-in-a-lifetime trip to your favourite Grand Prix, or even retirement. We all want a straightforward path to those goals, but the real world doesn't usually work that way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan and a clear path forward. And having the bull at your back helps your whole financial life move with you. So when your plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
The Athletic.
There were times during the 2024 MotoGP season as Pecco Bagnaia or Jorge Martin or even Marc Marquez made inexplicable mistakes that we were thinking, who on earth is the number one rider of this season? And it's fair to say that when I asked everyone on the Race MotoGP podcast panel and a few of our friends to rank their top 10 riders of the season, that indecision came through somewhat in a wildly varying set of scores that have made a very fun top 10. For me, Matt Beer, Simon Patterson, Val Khorounzhiy and Megan White to debate over the next hour-ish. I've got a feeling this might be a long one. We've also asked some members of the extended The Race MotoGP podcast family to chuck their scores in as well. So you also hear from our roving reporter and designer, Ollie Card, our boss, Glenn Freeman, and Josh Suttle, our deputy F1 editor, who has really no business on MotoGP podcast, has been allowed to vote as well because he has very strong opinions about several MotoGP riders. And so I thought this was a fun time to get him involved too. I say he's got no place being there. He does follow it as well. My scoring method when doing any kind of top 10 tends to be to give myself as little thinking time as possible and then just commit to whatever vibes-based method I've gone for. Megan, how long did it take you to come up with your top 10 ranking?
Maybe 3 minutes. I also went for a kind of vibes-based method. I was like, who do I want to be the top 10 and who should be the top 10, and then kind of combined the two.
Nice. Val, what's is your thinking process a bit spreadsheety and data-based and very fair, or more random?
No, unfortunately, it is mostly vibes-based, but at the same time, it did take like 3 months. Genuinely. I had a draft top 10 3 months ago, and I looked at it multiple times in the round since. And in fact, number one changed hands at least 2 times, maybe more. So yeah, it was kind of a mess. Like the bottom half of the top 10 was very, very easy for me. The top half was a nightmare.
Excellent. Simon, last year when we did this top 10, you used your rider rankings that you've done after every race this season and the average accrued scores from that. And, you know, we wouldn't expect that to necessarily make a top 10 that you'd stick with, because although in theory the math should work out, things change over a season. And it's a relative ranking and stuff as well. But last year you were like, yeah, this actually mirrors what I think precisely. What's happened this year?
The exact same thing, believe it or not.
Excellent.
Which is kind of wild. Which means that the actual process of ranking riders every weekend takes about 30 seconds because it's just like, yep, that's done. Like that bit is I know it in my head going into it.
Val's face, listeners, when Simon says that ranking takes 30 seconds was outstanding.
Writing about it takes quite a bit longer, but the actual initial process, you know. The problem is that I didn't do the sensible thing and keep a spreadsheet as the season went. So it then took like 48 hours to put all of the rider rankings for the entire season for 29 riders, I think, that competed in MotoGP this year into one massive spreadsheet, sort it all out and work out my top 10. But I've stuck with what I got. I didn't even think about not sticking with what I'd got, actually.
This is a slight F1 diversion, but I'm aware that Ed Straw, one of our F1 correspondents, has a very detailed and thorough process that involves rewatching multiple qualifying laps on board to do his driver rankings after every race. I've also seen Ben Anderson in his days of doing driver ratings when we were all at Autosport basically get a biro piece of paper and a pint late at night on a Sunday after a Grand Prix and just smash through them in about 3 seconds. I've got a lot of admiration for both methods. So let's get stuck in to a really fun list with a lot of variation potential for debate. Starting at the bottom, number 10, Maverick Viñales. So highest rating for Maverick Viñales came from Val, who put him 8th for the season. The lowest rankings were 10th, and that was me, Josh, Ollie and Glenn all went 10th, and Megan and Simon, you two went 9th. Val, as clearly a Viñales superfan, you can go first to justify that, and then I'm happy for Megan and Simon to jump on that.
It was going to be higher for much of the season because he has been the best Aprilia rider. He has finally, I think, decisively swung it his way compared to Aleix Espargaro, even though Barcelona, the Solidarity Grand Prix, was kind of evidence of otherwise. Barcelona is a particular track. On the whole, Maverick finally took over as Aprilia's leading man, and there were too many good moments. Like, even if you exclude Coda at the start of the season, because that was 20 years ago already, but all the good moments during the weekends, all the moments where I went where the Aprilia doesn't belong there right now, and Maverick has put it there, is what stuck with me. That has left him more exposed to the fact that then you look at where he is after lap 1, and it's hilarious every single time because he starts 7th, ends up 14th every single time. And you can only defend that to a point. Obviously, the Aprilia is very bad at starting a Grand Prix, but also Viñales is uniquely timid in battle and uniquely prone to just kind of giving up once he ends up 16th or 15th or 13th after lap 1, because he's obviously not the most accomplished, assured overtaker on the grid under this current formula. It's not he said he was the best starter at Aprilia in terms of reaction time. That might be true. I mean, I don't really have any reason to disbelieve that, but he is not the best starter of Aprilia at Aprilia in terms of situational, positional awareness on lap 1. He's not. I think Aleix probably is that. 10th makes sense to me. Look, it makes a lot of sense to me to be disappointed and annoyed at Maverick Viñales, but ultimately, as the best Aprilia rider, he was gonna end up reasonably safe in my top 10, and 8th felt right.
Megan, your Viñales thoughts?
I mean, when I thought about it initially, I was like, he shouldn't really be in the top 10. And then I thought, well, he was 7th in the standings. He won a race. You get points for winning a race, like, fair. I don't know. I mean, I agree with all of what Val said, but I think he had some good moments, but he does let himself down by the fact that he seems to start a race and go, oh, are we doing this now? And then catches up a bit. But he won a race, so that puts him in the top 10. His other performances, if you look throughout the season, he had a fairly good number of like top 7, top 6 finishes. So I think that 9th was fair, which is what I gave him.
My problem with Maverick is all the weekends he's let me down. And I feel like that's what's come into the rankings here, because it reflects across the season. He's either like top 3 in my rankings, or he's like 17th because he's finished 17th. And across the season, the consistency just wasn't there to be higher.
Have you got your spreadsheet within your eye line at the moment? Because I'm
did.
curious, like how low Vinales might have been on some weekends. Because there's definitely been weekends when I've watched the race progressing and thinking 21st or 22nd for Maverick in Simon's ratings this week.
So across the season, he's went 14, 3, 1, 16, 6, 9, 15, 5, 11, 13, 8, 22, 16, 7, 9, 12, 8, 11, 9, 21.
And I think that last 21 was generous.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And Megan, your noise that you started your answer with as well, I think sums up Maverick Vinales for a lot of us. I put him in. I felt like an Aprilia rider was 10th for me, and it was quite hard to split them because they both had enough invisible moments in different ways. In some ways, Vinales hurt himself more by the Austin performance being so good because my expectations that he could... I didn't think he'd do that every week. He's Maverick Vinales, but I thought he might do it 3 or 4 times, and that was it.
If I was going to describe him, it would be baffling. It's all over the place.
When the good stuff happens, you don't know where the good stuff has come from. But at the same time, like you say, Megan, there were enough times we did pop up in the top 5, top 6, top 7, and I sort of forgot those because he did those fairly invisibly. Val?
But genuinely, why is it baffling? Like, that's the part that I don't get. Inconsistent in terms of results, sure. I don't... For me, it's actually like the most understandable rider on the MotoGP grid. He can't race. For me, that's the start and the finish of it. If Maverick Vinales was a rider in that old era of MotoGP where he didn't really have to race anybody but 3 other bikes, he'd win every championship, basically. Well, I'm being hyperbolic, but it's the fact that they're consistently making him race other bikes that is his downfall.
How dare they?
Yeah, maybe, Val, you've reached the point of acceptance of that. Whereas I'm just still a bit like, there's times where he looks really good, and then you're like, what are you doing? Where are you going? Like, and also the way he speaks as well, like when you hear what he has to say, it's like you said about the best Aprilia starter, it's like, are you? Is that?
It's like you said, though, Val, it's the difference between the start and what you do after that first 2 seconds of the start that actually decides where you end up on the first lap. Also, you could look at most of his career and say, okay, yeah, you can't really race. You look at Austin, he raced like an absolute demon. He raced like the best rider on the planet. This is not a guy who should just go, get to the TT and stop doing this. He can overtake. But once a season?
But Austin, he also had like half a second in the pocket. And that, of course, that makes things easier every single time.
Yeah, but also, I'm sure there's races where Vinales has sat behind riders who are a second slower than him and not managed to pass them. Yeah.
Look, the Aprilia is not the most raceable bike. We will find out. Genuinely, we'll find out so much. That's a ridiculous thing to say for a rider who's been on 3 different bikes in MotoGP already, but we will find out so much about Maverick Vinales on the KTM next season. The KTM's built to race. It starts well, it breaks well. So either if Maverick cannot make his way forward past people and then keep him behind on the KTM, then there's a very, very, very hard ceiling placed on what he can actually achieve in the years he has remaining in MotoGP. But if it's mostly the Aprilia thing, and again, it's hard to say because of what we've seen from Aleix, from Raul, from Miguel this season. We have to see it at KTM, but I think for this season, Austin was the outlier, but Austin was a pace outlier too. Austin was just it was insane how quick he was at Austin. It was insane that for Maverick Vinales, a rider for whom the race often ends on lap 1, when he ended up in the pack, you could still absolutely go, he should still make his way through. He should still win this. I think in 2017, when that early purple patch with Yamaha, there was also another race like this. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was Qatar. I think it was the opener. Fell back and then muscled his way through easy. Just needs a pace advantage. And that's a shame, but the talent is there sometimes to make it happen.
I do want to have a very quick... We don't generally approve on the race of mentioning people outside the top 10 in top 10 discussions, but I do want to quickly throw in Aleix Espargaro because, Simon, you gave him 10th, so where'd you put Vinales? 9th. So you felt Maverick was still the stronger of the Aprilia riders over the season. I really agonised over putting Vinales in ahead of Espargaro because Espargaro's peaks, were absolutely superb, I would say. But there were also a long run of races where he was in retirement mode.
Yeah, he was consistently, I think, probably higher across the season, or at least more consistent. But then we just got to the flyaways and he already checked out, and I think that showed in his performance. It showed in his results, and he finished his career really strongly at the last race, but wasn't enough to kind of drag it back up again after that kind of mediocre 6-race run.
If you want more of our opinions on Espargaro and his amazingly all over the place and in the end glorious career, he is the subject of the latest video on our new MotoGP YouTube channel, the Race Moto on YouTube. The title of the video is, let's dig that out, MotoGP will miss its divisive teammate destroyer, which I was quite pleased with. It's Val and Simon's opinion on everything that Aleix has done from 125cc onwards, basically. And I think Aleix actually watched it himself last night, and I'm sure if he's got a strong feeling on it, he'll be letting Simon know fairly soon. Let's go on to 9th, Brad Binder. In our scoring system, by the way, Brad Binder and Maverick Vinales were actually tied. Brad gets 9th over Vinales thanks to Megan, ranking Brad as high as 6th and therefore giving him a win on countback. He didn't make Simon's top 10 at all. I put him 9th, and Glenn was quite generous to Brad. He put him 7th. But yeah, let's start positive. Megan, you made the difference here. Brad Binder's season.
I'm very surprised at this. I didn't think that I was being particularly generous at all. I thought that was quite a standard, like, oh yeah, he was 6th, he was pretty good, he put in some good results, he got podium. I didn't think that was controversial, but maybe I was too nice, I don't know. I thought Brad had a really good season. He was 5th behind like 4 very, very strong Ducatis. He ultimately beat Pedro Acosta to 5th. He was consistently in the top 10. There was one race that he finished where he finished outside the top 10. I thought he was pretty good.
So for the counter argument, this is the first time I want to bring in one of our fellow the race colleagues. So Josh Suttle's opinion of Brad Binder has been fairly strongly negative. Every time me and Val and Simon bang on our MotoGP Slack channel about how heroic Binder's being, Josh is often in there going, nah. So let's play Josh's view of Binder's season. I should say he didn't hate it. He did put him 9th.
Prior to the season, I had a sneaking suspicion that KTM was a lot better than what we'd seen in previous years, and that Brad Binder had been somewhat flattered by having average or injured teammates, and I think Pedro Acosta has shown what that KTM is capable of, and reflects a little bit poorly on Brad Binder. Yes, Binder just outpointed him. That's more a reflection of his impressive point scoring. If this was a top 10 Riders of the Year based on point scoring, reliability, consistency, Binder's in the top 3, but I've taken this to be the top 10 most impressive Riders of the Year, and there were just too many occasions where I just was a bit underwhelmed by Binder this year. He's been in the sport long enough now where you're just kind of waiting for him to take another step, and it feels like we've just hit his ceiling, and Acosta has shown what that spike's capable of, and Binder just isn't capable of those same peaks. So yes, an incredible point-scoring season, but one that, when I compared it to other riders in terms of how impressive it was, I felt Binder was just knocked down and down and down until he's ended up at 9th on my list.
Val?
Yeah, no, it's a very, very cogent, very good argument. It's, I think in terms of the next step, it's always been difficult to judge. And for me, I think I put Brad one place lower than Josh. But for me, that's the ranking that felt the worst in terms of like exposing my whole methodology for this, or exposing just how many like known unknowns we have in this sport, if that makes sense. So for instance, run a mental exercise. Take this exact same season, right? But replace Pedro Acosta on the Tech 3 gas with me. Right? I'm on the Tech 3 gas now. So apart from the fact that every session is red flagged, apart from that, Binder ranks much higher. Because ultimately, he broke Jack Miller in half this season compared to last season. He even started out qualifying him regularly, which has always been more of a Miller thing than a Binder thing. But this season, Binder has been better over one lap. Without the specter of Pedro Acosta, Brad Binder has had a really good season on an underwhelming RC16. And we still, I think, do generally agree that the RC16 has underwhelmed this season. But Acosta showed up, and Binder pays a penalty because he did not convincingly outperform a rookie. In fact, even though the point standings say he beat Acosta, for me, Acosta has been the more credible performer over the season, even without accounting for the experience difference. And that sucks. For me, this is the part that makes me upset, because it was this easy for Binder's ranking here for me to swing from one of the, like, making it a big 6 instead of a big 5 and putting him in there too. Well, it would have been big 5 because there would be spoilers. Anyway, putting him in the top half of the standings and having him barely sneak into my top 10. The only difference in that was Pedro Acosta's existence, which Brad has had nothing to do with. So I feel something about it feels wrong.
No, but Acosta does exist. That's the thing. And Acosta has created a new benchmark. And, I think, Val, you may have once said on this podcast, put Brad Binder on a Ducati and he becomes a championship favourite.
Yes.
Am I misquoting you there? No. And there was definitely a time when I thought that as well. And then Acosta just, not unfairly, just rewrote what I thought of Brad Binder. Simon, you didn't even put Brad Binder in your top 10. So I guess you're leaning more towards the Josh camp on this season. I'd imagine that Acosta is quite a big reason for that.
I think KTM's golden child has been thoroughly embarrassed by a rookie this season. I think that for the rider that we've heard KTM and a lot of other people, including people like Val, say this guy would be a champion if he was in another bike, to then have a rookie turn up and just, I don't care if Binder beat him in the championship standings. That's only because rookie Pedro Acosta did a fair bit of crashing this year. If you give him the points from like half the races where he crashed out of where he was at that point, then he's like 50 points clear. It's that much. He was just better. And I think all the arguments about the bike not being good enough maybe have been a bit disproven this year. And it's that whole thing of, is the bike not good enough and has been Binder making it look good? Or has Binder been fairly average in a bike that's better than we expected? And having seen Acosta's season, I'm starting to lean towards the other side of that a little bit, because I think he was, super strong. It's been a long time since we've seen Brad Binder like consistently fighting for podiums, and Acosta did it this year.
I'm going to move on to number 8.
Wait. There's just one thing I need. This is very interesting to me and me alone. I did a bit of data analysis looking Binder versus Acosta this season, and if you just look at their average race position where they're running, it's actually super similar, super similar. So that, for me, that tells me that the DNF impact is not as high as maybe it feels, but Acosta has had many more laps in the top 3.
And Acosta is the child on the satellite bike with completely zero MotoGP experience. Yeah. Moving on to number 8. This is where I'm going to fall out with Simon and Megan. Johann Zarco. I was his biggest fan on this podcast. I put him 6th, and in a second I will rant at length. Not at length, I'll keep the podcast rolling, about why. You were one place behind Val. You put him 7th. Val was quizzically thinking that he was the Zarco superfan. Simon didn't put Zarco in his top 10 at all. Megan put him 10th. Everyone else was like somewhere nearby. My reasoning for putting Zarco that high was just any time I saw a Honda doing anything of interest all season, it was absolutely Zarco by a mile. Joan Mir was always on the floor. Luca Marini was extremely slow for a lot of the season and then more respectable. Zarco, the satellite rider, was the one making stuff happen. Even if it required a toe to get there with some of the good qualifying performances, he was the one who was leading Honda forward. And the Honda was rubbish. Simple as that. He was a proper hero of this season. Simon, you didn't think he was worthy of a top 10 place?
I think a bit of the Zarco as a hero thing is recency bias.
No, I was shouting at the screen saying Zarco's a hero in March.
He would be in my top 10. He would be in my top 10 if it was like Misano onwards. But I think that the first half of the season, everybody in the Honda was awful. And at the end of the day, yes, he did good things towards the end of the year, but he did good things on a bike that was improving. Every Honda rider improved at the same time. And there just wasn't enough for me to think that he deserved a space in the top 10, given, where he finished the season, standings-wise, results-wise. Yeah.
We don't have a clip from Glenn on this, but he did say to me that he put Zarco 7th, but every time he rethought his list after sending it, he felt Zarco went a place higher as he reconsidered. Before I let Val come in to join me in the Zarco defence, Megan, you thought he was only 10th.
All of the reasons that you have given are the reason I put him 10th. I don't think any of that meant that he deserved to be higher than 10th. Like, he was like a token 10th, like, well done for your efforts. It wasn't like a... Do you know what I mean? I don't think anything higher than 10th is like, wow, that seems really generous. I think 10th was like, you did a good job, you were the best Honda, well done. That's why I've given you 10th. that didn't deserve more than 10th for me.
Val?
Yeah, I'm in the Glenn camp right now in that I'm actually really annoyed at myself for putting him 7th. I'm looking at that list right now, and I may have whiffed. Maybe should have been 6th. Anyway, 7th is fine.
You totally should have been
okay.
6th, looking at who you put 6th. Absolutely.
Yeah, I know. I think he's been awesome. And I think, again, this is, of course, the same consideration as with Binder Acosta and the same consideration as with every other goddamn rider on this list. But Johan Zarco can only be compared to the other Honda guys, and he's made them look bad. Routinely. Very bad. And he's made Joan Mir look expendable to Honda completely for me by racing basically as fast as him, crashing slightly less, and consistently qualifying so much better. I think, I don't have the number at hand, but I think Johan began the season with like a double-digit run of races of being the top Honda qualifier. And there's basically never a qualifying session where he wasn't either the top Honda or right there with them. For a rider who last year was a very dubious qualifier at Ducati, I think that's fantastic. For a rider who did not know the bike before the season, a bike that is famously tricky, even though maybe its trickiness is overstated, but still clearly not a simple bike. For him to come in and basically immediately become the Honda benchmark, I think that deserves the highest of praise. And for me, legacy-wise, it is much more worthwhile than playing second fiddle at Pramac for several years.
7th on our list, Fabio Di Gianantonio, who was placed 6th by both Simon and Josh. Val and Glenn gave him his lowest score of 9th, and the rest of us were somewhere in the middle. So let's start positive. Simon, you put Digi at 6th.
I've been really impressed with him this season. Shoulder injury aside, I think he's done a really, really good job of being, probably, Marc Marquez aside, the best GP23 rider, the best to adapt to the new rear tire on that bike, which clearly doesn't work very well with it. I think it's been a really, really strong effort from him. He's ended up with a GP25 for next season. He's going to be a consistent podium contender next year. He's going to win races next year on that bike. And I think we get a hint of that this year with the results we've seen from him in the last few races, or the last half of a season, really. Like thoroughly all-round impressive from me.
Val, you only put him 9th. I don't imagine it's a negative 9th, but he didn't impress us as much as some other people for you.
It's not a negative 9th, but it's a 9th that, only slightly colored by Marc Marquez being on the same bike, because I don't expect a lot of people to just match Marc. I felt at various points in the season, even sort of before the injury trouble started, that there was an advantage over Marco Bezzecchi specifically that he had started the season with, that he wasn't consistently pressing in terms of the weekend's result that he was delivering. For me, there is still a little bit of a fragility to Digia's weekends where, he'll blast a bit of pace, but not always convert it into the optimal result. Look, he safeguarded his MotoGP career. He got the best contract available. I've always been a pretty big believer in the ultimate talent that is there. I think he's had a really good season. I don't think it's been that hugely good of a season to where he completely eclipsed the other non-alien GP23s for me. And the points reflect that a little bit, even though obviously injury has played a big part in him being shorter of the total he could have had.
Megan, where does he stand for you? Where did he end up in your ranking? 8th.
Yeah, I thought he had a really good season. I thought there were some really impressive performances. I think, unfortunately, the fact that he didn't race in the last 2 races, through no fault of his own, but he probably would have been higher had he raced in those 2 races, because I'm sure he would have been, again, challenging for podiums, if not on the podium. He was 4th in the last 2 races that he raced in. So he probably would have continued to do well and probably would have been, 6th or 7th. I thought he had a really good year. I think he continued that momentum that he built at the end of 2023, and he's put himself in a great position for next year. So I think he was really, really good this year.
Yeah, for me, I think Marc Marquez redefined what that bike could do. It's unfair to compare most people to Marc Marquez. Really, did just score kind of decently for me because of the Bezzecchi comparison. You know, Bezzecchi was a guy who was a top 3 in our top 10 last year, outside title contender. Didier handled the season overall better than Bez. But also, like, for me, a big thing with Didier is this time, like sort of 13, 14 months ago, this guy was out of MotoGP. Now he's going to 2025 as one of the 3 people who will get the best bike on the grid. Now that might be a little bit of an oversell for him, but it's not a crazy outcome, and he's earned that well.
Yeah, I love that outcome. What I would say, Matt, to be a bit of a buzzkill, is, you know, Marco Bezzecchi was not even for a second a consideration for the top 10 for me this season. Like, no. Didn't even come into it, right? If I was Ducati and I had free choice between them two over who to put on a work spec bike at VR46, I would still pick Marco Bezzecchi.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
This episode is brought to you by Merrill. We all have goals, and we all want to get to those goals, whether that's saving for a home renovation, that once-in-a-lifetime trip to your favourite Grand Prix, or even retirement. We all want a straightforward path to those goals, but the real world doesn't usually work that way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan and a clear path forward. And having the bull at your back helps your whole financial life move with you. So when your plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
Your time and expertise are valuable. And with professionals spending nearly half the work week on written communication, focus is one of the most important things to have at work. With Grammarly as your AI writing partner, you can stay focused and get through your work faster with relevant, real-time suggestions wherever you write. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. And best of all, Grammarly works across 500,000 apps and websites, allowing you to work smarter, not longer. For 15 years, Grammarly has helped professionals do more with their writing. So what are you waiting for? Get more done with Grammarly. Download Grammarly for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast.
Okay, on to our top 6. Now, it doesn't reflect it in the points in the end necessarily, but it did feel in a few of the people's comments that there was a bit of a gap here where there was a clear top 6, and then below that it got a bit harder with a few exceptions. I'm going to chuck in a clip from our boss, Glenn Freeman, about this, because in his list, when he sent it, he actually wrote big gap between 6 and 7, and Josh said similar things. This is Glenn's justification for having that kind of concern about the depth in MotoGP this year.
Hello, the Race MotoGP Podcast, Glenn here. I have to admit, I found it pretty difficult to do the bottom half of my top 10. Sometimes that's because you're spoilt for choice, with too many riders for too few places. But this year it felt like the opposite. I could have quite easily stopped at 6 or 7 riders, and I'd have tried to get away with that if I thought Matt would let me, but I know what a relentless podcast host he is. Much like the Dorna TV directors, to me this felt like a 3-man season, and anyone else could only get noticed by me and by the TV cameras if they overperformed for a few weekends and got themselves up the front. But the ones who didn't get amongst it at the front at any point were just... The other problem was they were so inconsistent, and inconsistency frustrates the hell out of me. So I do mark people down heavily for that. Saying that, I also left Alex Marquez out because I felt he was just consistent without showing enough peaks. So maybe I'm just a massive hypocrite. But anyway, more depth, please, in 2025 MotoGP.
Very briefly, everyone is actually on this podcast today. Is that fair? Go on, Val.
I mean, it's fair, but I don't think it's an indictment on the bottom half of the top 10. I think they're all just still good riders. Just that for me, it wasn't the top 6, it was the top 5 that really separated themselves from the rest in my mind's eye. But I don't necessarily think that's a problem. I mean, it's good to have a season where you have like 10 superstars, but it's also, it's nice to have an elite. It's nice to have people approaching alien status. I mean, that's what a lot of people pine for when they think of the MotoGP of old.
Across the 7 of us that voted in this, there was a lot of, not agreement on the positions, but on agreement of who should be in the top 10. There were only 2 anomalies. We've talked about Aleix Espargaro getting into Simon's top 10. The other anomaly was also Simon's fault, and that is the single vote for Franco Morbidelli, who Simon felt was the 8th best rider of 2024. Val's eyes widened a little bit there. Simon, justify yourself quickly.
I mean, he was kind of, he was the 4th best GP24 rider, but he was still on a GP24 that put him pretty high in the standings, put him pretty high into contention with races at the end of the year. I feel like we didn't get a real chance to see him in action until well on in the season. I would have liked to have seen him actually complete preseason testing and come into the season already, knowing how to ride a bike instead of having those disaster first few rounds where he was just completely absent because he hadn't done any testing with that serious, like really serious brain injury from the start of the year. So I think all things considered, he did a pretty good job over the season. And I think he kind of ended up where he felt like he roughly deserved to be in my rankings.
Val?
I think this gives us a pretty good separation on who's a kind soul and who's Val, because
You're not the kind one here.
Well, clearly not, because I checked I did a full ranking when I was flying back from Barcelona, just a full ranking on the phone of all 22. Morbidelli was 16th. Which honestly felt relatively kind. So,
Val, he's not still riding a Yamaha. You don't have to judge him down just because he's Yamaha.
Then why is he racing other Yamahas?
I think that's where we leave the Morbidelli section. Let's go on to people that actually did make our top 10 overall, our top 6. Starting with a contentious one with quite a big spread here. Enea Bastianini is 6th in the top 10, but big variation in votes. So for me, Josh and Ollie, he was only 8th. Val put him 5th. Val put him 6th. Megan put him 5th. Simon put him 4th. I'm going to chuck in Ollie, our roving reporter and designer's justification for putting Bastianini down in 8th, despite him being a contender for 3rd in the championship and a race winner this year.
This ranking is potentially a little harsh considering how high his peaks were this year, particularly with his double win at Silverstone and that emphatic Emilia-Romagna race win. But when you look at what Bagnaia was doing with the same equipment, Enea so rarely looked like he had the better of his teammates, and ending the year 18-2 in terms of qualifying kind of reflects this deficit. Those moments where he saved his best performance until the latter stage of a race were some of the season's highlights, but it almost makes it worse because he so clearly has it in him to achieve more, but he just lacks that consistency to really bring his A game every single weekend like the very best do.
Simon, you can come in next because you still felt his season was worthy of 4th place in your list.
Yeah, I mean, the guy had a lot of good results. He won races. He was at the sharp end. He wasn't as good as the top 2 in the championship, and he wasn't as good as Marc Marquez. But if you'd asked me to pick a position where he was going to finish at the start of the season, I would probably have said 4th. So he pretty much exactly nailed my expectations for the year with it.
The thing about the 18-2 that Ollie brought up is actually, surprisingly, I think the 18-2 says more about Pecco Bagnaia in qualifying trim than Enea Bastianini. Bastianini, I mean, he did get beat really hard in the qualifying head-to-head, but he was kind of consistently closer than you would think for a rider who's just not known for qualifying pace at all. Like he wasn't letting himself down with qualifying. He was putting himself in positions where he kind of needs to be. It's the rest of his game that didn't always come together. this season. There were, for me, the Enea Bastianini championship season maybe looks like it actually has qualifying like this, but then he always makes up for it over the longer distance races. And he himself noticed this season that wasn't necessarily translating to the same extent. I think I heard Bastianini multiple times suggest that late race pace advantage of his was gone. I don't think it was gone. I think it was still quite prevalent, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't the absolute supernatural nonsense that it was in some of the previous seasons.
But similarly, for the first time, we saw him this year at the sharp end of sprints. So while he might have lost somewhere, he gained somewhere else, and he was actually racing like a complete racer in races that last year he wasn't able to do that in. So I think it balanced in the grand scheme of things for me.
He was never going to miss my top 10. I mean, I think it was a pretty good season, all things considered. But I should say he's much closer to Binder in 10th than any of the top 5.
Megan, you were relatively positive, putting him 5th.
Yeah, and I think it was a bit of a tussle between putting him 5th and putting him 4th. He won races. He got lots of a decent number of podiums. He put in a lot of very good performances. He, as Val said, the qualifying thing says more about Pecco than it says about Enea. I know you can't completely remove someone's teammate when you're thinking about these things, but Enea had some really good results. As I've said before, he just needs to get over the thing where he rides his race like a student who's doing their coursework and has realised really near the deadline that they need to do this work. They know they can do the work well. They know that already. So they're like, well, I can leave it till a week before and I'll get a really good grade still. But if you'd started a week earlier, you'd get an even better grade. So just come on. There were a couple of races towards the end of the season where it was he's remembered that you have to do the whole race during, from start to finish rather than in the last 3 laps. I think he had some really good performances. I think 5th felt fitting. I was umming and ahhing about 5th and 4th. And as you will see, the person who I gave 4th to just swung it, overall. But he didn't have a bad year. He, I think a lot of the criticisms levelled against him are just because his teammate was so amazing. So, no shade to Enea there.
Heading into the top 5, which is when things start to get all over the place in terms of our scores, which is a good time to do my endless bang on about the Race Members Club, where you can quiz us about this sort of thing, throw questions at us, chat with us in the community. I feel like my list of things that I bang on about in this podcast gets longer and longer, and I'm not going to apologise for that in the slightest, because the Members Club content, the MotoGP social media channels, the MotoGP YouTube channel, the fact we're doing a retro series in the Members Club on MotoGP next year, other things I've forgotten about, the merchandise, that's another one. All this new MotoGP stuff is happening because largely listeners to this podcast are coming up with ideas, getting behind stuff and making it so much fun to do it all. So in the Members Club over the coming weeks, we'll have one-on-one interviews with so many riders uncut in full. You'll hear bits of that in the main feed, but for the whole things, head to the Members Club. You can still vote in our MotoGP Revisited poll. Are we going to relive the 2015 season or the 2006 season next year? Right now, 2015 leads 56% to 44% in the vote. The vote stays open for probably 2 more days after this podcast comes out. Simon is shaking his head at the thought of reliving 2015. Val is giggling. If you want to make sure 2015 wins, if you want to save 2006, if you're in the Members Club already and haven't voted, find that post on Patreon. I'll put it in the community section after this podcast just to bring it back to the top of your list. If you're not in the Members Club yet, we do have Black Friday discounts running until I think the 3rd of December. So it's a very good time to join us for all the stuff we've got coming up over the next few weeks and months in there. Back to this top 5. 5th is Fabio Quartararo, and rather like Johann Zarco, you've got me and Val emphatically on one side of the fence here and then a bit of variation. I put him 2nd, Val put him 1st, rider of the season. Big raised eyebrow from Megan, who sat back in her chair there. Simon didn't look surprised in the slightest. Simon put him 7th, as did Megan. So reasonable variation going on here. Let's start with Val. Fabio Quartararo was the best rider of 2024. Val.
I don't know what to say because I don't know what to say. That's the problem. The first spot.
It's just
changed.
So obvious.
No. The first spot changed hands. I said 2 or 3 times, but maybe every 10 minutes in my head also potentially. Even after I sent the ranking to you, Matt, I was like, am I really going to do this? Am I really going to go out on a limb and say that this is how I feel? And I looked at a numbers case for it and wasn't really convinced it's there. And then I stopped for a second. I was like, but I feel it. I feel it. I feel Fabio Quartararo is the best rider in MotoGP, and I feel Fabio Quartararo, Peak Mark is the best rider in MotoGP, but I felt other riders who were in the conversation for the top one, for the first place this season, annoyed me in some way. They left something on the table. They gave me too much of a hang-up to put him number one. It was genuinely a race of who left the least on the table, who disappointed me the most at something or other. I don't think that the Yamaha is head and shoulders. A lot. I don't think
people have two shoulders, one head.
Thank you very much.
Normally.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I don't think that the Yamaha is this like chasm above the Honda. And I went and I tallied up the Japan Cup through the season, and obviously he obliterates everyone every single time. I mean, he was the only rider out of them doing anything to elevate those two manufacturers. I think he's fantastic. The qualifying score versus Alex Rins is could actually be a bit better, but I mean, I think this is his toughest teammate yet, even if he's a bit limited, and Fabio's obliterated him, basically removed him as a factor this season. I mean, that's the main of it. I think this is a guy who absolutely rules, and I think this is an unprecedented situation in MotoGP where a rider who's this elite is stuck with a bike that's currently not capable of fighting for podiums and wins.
Megan, I'd like you to verbalise your facial expression when you heard Val had put Fabio first.
Val, I absolutely love this. I think this is brilliant. I was like, sensible, like looking at the standings, looking at the results, blah, blah, blah. I did toy with putting Fabio 6th, but I think putting Fabio at number 1 is an amazing move. I have so much respect for that. That's my favourite pick of the rankings by far. Amazing. Like, Fabio is great. I love Fabio. I have so much time for Fabio, and I think everything you've said is correct.
But you thought he was 7th.
Well, I mean, if you look at the standings and the results as I did, yeah, like it wasn't great, but that's not his fault. I think my method was different to Val's. Val's was far more vibes based. Mine was vibes, but also standings and all the rest of it. But no, I think Val's points are all completely valid. I think the only thing that, as I said, I toyed with putting him 6th over 7th, and I settled with 7th in the end. But like, there is definitely the case that he outperformed, everyone. When you look at the machinery to the talent thing, like, yeah, he did an amazing job. Yeah, props to Val for that one.
I guess before Simon comes in, I guess when you, like me and Val have here, when you kind of ignore the standings to that extent and you kind of go, no, this person is riding or driving so far above their machinery, that's very hard to prove. Unless you have GPS data and aero numbers and horsepower figures and know which tyres they've got for everyone throughout the whole season. This is purely vibes based. You cannot prove that Fabio is outriding the Yamaha by this much.
Yeah, and if it was solely vibes based, he would have been number 1 on mine. Like, Fabio is great. I have so much time for him. Like, everything about Fabio. Like, so I have a lot of respect for it. I think I should have been more bold.
But Simon, you do factor in machinery and expectations heavily into your race by race rankings, and even considering that, Fabio only comes out 7th over the season for you.
Yeah, I think Val's insane. I don't think you can comfortably say that Fabio Quartararo on a factory Ducati would have beaten Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia. And for that reason, you can't say it. He might have,
yeah.
But I'm not comfortable saying it like absolutely he would have. And therefore, for that reason, he can't possibly be number 1. Sorry, Val. And yeah, I have him a bit lower than number 2 or number 3 either. But, I think he's the top non-rookie, non-Ducati rider in my rankings. And I think that's pretty much where I think he stood this season, because the bike is a factor in it. The whole thing is a factor. We're here to get results, and his results were good considering, but only considering the machinery he was on, and relative to the others, they weren't that great. Because, I mean, yes, the bike is a disaster, but I think, I'm trying to take the whole thing into consideration here. And I think, if anything, he actually probably scored a bit higher than maybe he should have on a few occasions over the course of my season's rankings, through either, maybe not through his own fault, but like there was an awful lot of running out of fuel this season, and that is something that is ultimately the rider's fault, and he never really got scored down in my ratings for it. So, I'm happy with where I put him. I think that he had a decent season. I can't wait to see him in a bike that's better again, but the bike isn't better right now, so until that happens, he's going to have to be comfortable being considerably better in my ratings than he was in the championship stand-ins.
I should say, I think it is really fair to, for instance, mark him down for his role as a lead rider in the development of a bike that is disappointed. So that was my one consideration of like, do I mark him down for that? And then I mentally decided, no, that happened in 2023. That doesn't count for this one. Very convenient decision.
I'd just like to point out that the reason the bike got better this year is because they stopped trying to add the horsepower to the engine that he's been demanding since 2019. So there is an element of that to it as well.
100%. But again, I've just decided that wasn't part of 2024. I decided that was in the past. I had the luxury of feeling that way. And like the other note that I definitely want to make, because I realize what this looks like. This looks like Val memeing his disappointment in Yamaha into a top 10 ranking. It's not, didn't come into it. Genuinely, just how I felt, just how I saw it.
I'm going to go down the middle to finish this Fabio section, because Ollie put Fabio 5th, and he did that not realising me and Val had gone for a 1-2 for Fabio Quartararo, and I think Ollie thought he was doing a really generous thing for Quartararo and praising the underdog. So here's Ollie on Quartararo. And the way he says Fabio at the start, I'm going to ask producer Johnny to leave in, because it's just lovely.
Fabio. Whenever I saw Fabio Quartararo in 2024, I just saw a rider who was just dragging a laggy Yamaha to places it really wasn't meant to go. Where there were opportunities to grasp, he was just unafraid to fight, and you just have to look at those frequent gaps to teammate Alex Rins in qualifying and the race results to see somebody who was just maximising their chances. He just overachieved on an inferior bike that really floundered in dirty air, and even with all of that extra power of the 2024 engine, it was always going to struggle to reach the podium. But Fabio just kept barging his way through the issues, and he put an admirably dogged performance in, frequently ending up in Q2 towards the tail end of the season. And whilst he's happy to vocalise his criticisms off-track, his on-track performance seldom looked half-hearted or despondent, and I've got so much time for a rider who has that attitude.
On to our top 4, and if you thought the Quartararo stuff was contentious, in 4th place, championship runner-up Pecco Bagnaia. So his best score was 2nd, and that was from Simon, Megan and Glenn. His worst score was 5th, which was me, Val and Josh. So we're going to start with the prosecution. Val, why was championship contender and winner of 8 billion races, Pecco Bagnaia, your 5th best MotoGP rider of 2024? Which I say like it's a bad thing, but I completely agree with you.
Yeah, I'd like to make it clear again. In my ranking, the difference between 1 and 5 is nothing, basically.
Yes, agreed.
You could, for me, the top 5 you can rank in any order, and I would find it in me to agree with it or to rationalize the reason. You could put Pecco Bagnaia at number 1, absolutely, and I would hear the case, and I wouldn't necessarily strongly disagree with it. He was, the Bagnaia Works Ducati combination was the fastest this season. For me, clearly, he was a phenomenal qualifier. He won the BMW qualifying award. He was consistently getting better in weekend and salvaging every weekend whenever he had a rough start. For me, he was quicker than Martin. We've discussed this already. For me, absolutely like more performant. That extra 10th, I think he consistently had. He's a phenomenal racer, but he also has the might of the factory armada and all of its data analysis and all of it, the whole mechanism being catered to him after he's already won 2 championships. So I marked him down for that relative to Martin. And then relative to the others, he won 11 Grand Prix. 11 Grand Prix is amazing. But if you're an elite rider, you're going to win 11 Grand Prix on a 2024 Ducati. It's head and shoulders the best bike on the grid.
Yeah, I'm going to quickly add my case to prosecution as well. And again, I've got so much admiration for the manner of the race wins and for so much. I do think he was unlucky as well. I don't think he threw a championship away, but in a very close top 5 where some people did some incredible things this year, he just stuck out for me as being the one of that quintet at the top who underachieved given that he was the top rider on the best bike on the grid in the factory team. That means you really should win the championship, and he didn't. And too many of the reasons he didn't, I don't think he blew it, but it was generally those DNFs, there were more that were his fault than weren't. Before Simon and Megan vehemently disagree with us, Glenn is going to vehemently disagree with us.
Well, I'm guessing from the tone of Matt's question to me, which was asking me to explain why I put Bagnaia so high, that nobody else had him in their top 2, I just couldn't look past that Sunday win count. I know he had an incredible bike, but there were 4 of those out there. And I know he's made himself a trivia question for winning that many races and failing to win the title, which was self-inflicted. But for me, that just took him out of the running for number 1. And I couldn't drop him lower than 2nd, given how good he was so often on Sundays, which, are still when the big points are paid. Of course, it was tight between him and Marquez in my mind. It was great to see Mark doing so well again on a reasonably good bike. But even if the bad days were championship costing bad, there were still so many good days that had Martin not done such an exceptional job to swoop in and make Pecco pay the price for those mistakes, he won so many races that we could easily still be talking about 3 titles in a row. So I couldn't look past that. It's, the win count is still incredible.
Simon.
The guy won very nearly 50% of the races this season and lost the championship because of a technical DNF. He absolutely deserves. I debated putting him number 1 because of the sheer amount of races he won this season, and he didn't. I know what Glenn said about his amazing Sunday performances. He stepped it up on Saturday this year too. He was better in sprints than he has been in the past as well. He had a phenomenal season. He was, I think, yes, he crashed. He crashed more than he should have, but he also. His number of crashes look bigger than they are because of the length of the season, which is why I'm talking about the percentage of races he won rather than the number of races he won. I think all in all, he did a really good job this year, and I couldn't possibly imagine having him outside the top 2.
And I'm guessing, Megan, you agree with that quite wholeheartedly.
My top 3 were very, very, very close, and I could have put any of them number 1 and been happy with it. But yeah, Pecco being lower than number 2 seems very unfair. Like, he won so many races, he put in so many good performances, he did so many good things. Yes, he crashed too many times, and that's why he's not number 1. But I would have very happily put him at number 1 and had no regrets about that. He had an amazing season. Jorge Martin had a marginally better season, but I don't think you can knock him down from 2nd to 4th for that.
No, that's why we chose 5th.
5th, yeah, exactly. It's even worse. It's even more baffling. I just think Pecco was quite clearly, I would probably say he was better. He just had some times where he maybe was less better than the other guy. So, I don't know. I just think anything lower than 2nd seems really harsh to me. Again, as I said, he could 3rd, maybe I could have understood a bit more, but no lower.
I should say, listeners, the watching the championship battle on my spreadsheet as these votes came in was hilarious. And because me and Val filed first, there was a time when Quartararo was heading for number 1 on this list and Bagnaia was basically nowhere. So it has turned out marginally more sane in the end.
But just a minor point, because obviously 5th is a bad headline number, but is being in the top 25% of riders on the grid bad? Is
yes.
Does he have to be number 1 because he was on the best bike?
The whole point of this entire exercise that is MotoGP is being number 1.
Well, yeah, but in our ranking, they don't actually care where they finished in our rankings, do they? I would imagine.
That at least one of them will care deeply.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Black Friday football on Prime is back this week. The Raiders and the Chiefs.
Into the end zone. Unbelievable catch.
An old school rivalry for a new game day.
Firing downfield hard.
Stream for free only on Prime.
Great move.
Black Friday football. Raiders versus Chiefs. Kickoff at 3 p.m. Eastern. Pregame at 1:30 p.m. Friday only on Prime. Restrictions apply. See Amazon.com/watch Black Friday football for details.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
On to our top three. So we know Bagnaia does not feature in our top three. I expect listeners, you have guessed who is in the top three, but the order is probably quite unpredictable right now, given how odd and contrasting our scores are. Number 3, Pedro Acosta. So the vote split here. The biggest Acosta skeptic, Simon, put him 5th. The biggest Acosta fans were Josh and Ollie, who both put him 2nd. So let's hear from those guys with the case for the awesomeness of Acosta first. We'll start with Ollie.
So thinking back to the beginning of the season when the Acosta hype train pulled into the paddock, the pressure from that expectation could have totally overwhelmed him. But he took to his first year with this sort of breezy swagger that just felt so refreshing. Pedro really hit the ground running with multiple podium finishes throughout the year. And sure, he then hit the ground literally, ending up with more crashes than any other rider this season. But hey, he's a rookie. He rated himself 6 out of 10 for the year. But even without that elusive first win that so many of us expected, he maximised his opportunities. He fought for victories and finished just 2 points behind Brad Binder. You look back at his maiden year in MotoGP and go, this rider did not suffer fools gladly, and neither did he suffer any intimidation from all of those multiple world champions he was battling with. He made big rookie mistakes, but he absorbed learnings from them each time and did it all with a sort of old school charisma that the sport has really been calling out for. You know, for a rookie season, only a few have surpassed him in terms of results, and those select few that did it on much better equipment than Pedro had access to this year.
My placing of Acosta was confirmed by reading, I have to admit, was an excellent article from Val on Acosta on the website, where basically Acosta had rated his season 6 out of 10, which is just massively underselling what has been a phenomenal rookie year. There's been a few disappointments, like I had high hopes for Raul Fernandez when he came in, and that was a huge disappointment when he turned up, and since then I think really hasn't kicked on in the way that I hoped. There was no disappointment with the way Pedro Acosta has come in, just blown, I think, even the very high expectations that many people had for him completely out of the water with the peaks he's had this year. It's just been mighty impressive right from the very start. And of course there's been dips, there's been crashes, that middle part of the year where he went a little bit off the boil. But he fully came back on and did a fantastic job. The pole position at Motegi, the podiums, just really, really impressive. Just absolutely wringing the neck of that KTM and getting so close to Brad Binder in the points as well. Just completely impressive. Run out of superlatives throughout the year for him. You just can't shake the feeling, but this is just a foundation for a sensational MotoGP career. And I think with history and hindsight, this season is only going to look even more impressive with the passage of time. It's the best rookie season since Marquez in 2013, and that just really boosts him up the ranking for me because it's just kind of redefined what we should come to expect from rookies, and he's set the bar very, very high for those to come. It really, really feels like that kind of once a decade kind of special rookie season that we've just witnessed.
So strong Acosta advocacy from Josh and Ollie, but Simon, you know, you've got a lot of time for Acosta, you're very pro Acosta, but you thought he's only 5th out of the riders this season.
He crashed a little bit too much. That's essentially what it comes down to. And he crashed a little bit too much towards the end of the season. I kind of thought it would... I mean, I think maybe that's the reason why. He started really strong. He was really, really good in the first half of the season whenever he was a rookie. And then as the season progressed, that's when he started to do the dumb stuff. And I think maybe that's coloured my judgment a little bit on it because, you know, we talk about him being a rookie, and he is, but in a season this long, there's a point where, you know, especially the last 2 races that are at circuits where he has already rode, where he's essentially not a rookie, and he didn't quite... I mean, he didn't even match the performances that he delivered earlier in the season at those races. And that just makes me a tiny bit cynical about the way that the year ended. And I think it's not any reflection on his talent. It's on the fact that he was asking too much from a bike that maybe wasn't ready to give it to him and was, launching himself to the moon in the process.
Acosta was going number 1 in my ranking until the Red Bull Ring, where he was slow, and I looked at it and I was like, probably not. Then there was a stretch where, again, he sort of crept up into number 1, and I was very strongly considering him for number 1. And it was leading the Motegi sprint, and I was like, well, here it comes, number 1. And then number 1 didn't happen. I agree completely. I think he was asking too much of the bike in many circumstances. I think he could have scored and should have scored more this season. I also do think that this MotoGP is uniquely hostile to rookies. I think it's the length of the calendar maybe offsets it a little bit, but the fact that you have to have everything sorted after first practice or else you're in for a world of pain is, for me, a considerable factor that makes life difficult. I would like to see simulated. I wouldn't actually like to watch all of it because that's too much racing, but I would like to see a Pedro Acosta rookie season under the old practice format where he just gets, normal FP1, normal FP2, and let's say FP3 with the Q2 bits. I wonder if that looks a little different and a little more fruitful. Also, he did ride for Tech 3, which, Tech 3 is a very good team. There's, I think, different schools of thoughts on how much extra a Works KTM swap would give him. I mean, as you'll hear on the Members Club in the Brad Binder interview, Binder's, argument that KTM has basically worked completely for Works bikes without really any difference this season. But if you also hear Pedro Acosta himself speak about it, he does feel there's a significant difference over just how much manpower is oriented towards him between the Tech 3 surroundings and the KTM surroundings. So it's really hard to tell. I probably don't place too much of an emphasis on it. It's the rookie stuff. He's top 3 for me. It's because he's a rookie.
Megan, he's 4th on your list. I think all of us had him up and down through the season. Did your opinion of Acosta change much between the kind of stunning start and the wobbly bit in the middle?
In the sense that he was not ever going to be top 3, and he wasn't ever going to be lower than 6th. Like, he kind of hovered around that, 4th, 5th, 6th. I was like, oh, well, Brad Binder finished above him, but then that doesn't really matter in terms of, who put in the best performances. At one point, I was like, oh, maybe Bastianini should be above him because Bastianini did actually win races. But ultimately, I think 4th was a fairer assessment given the good bits and the bad bits. I think they kind of evened out at 4th. As Simon said, he put in some really, really strong performances, but they ended in the gravel maybe more often than they should have. But, next year, let's see what happens.
Let's do our countdown then before our top 2. So, 10th place, Maverick Vinales. 9th place, Brad Binder. 8th place, Johan Zarco. 7th place, Fabio Di Gianantonio. 6th place, Enea Bastianini. 5th, Fabio Quartararo. 4th, Pecco Bagnaia. 3rd, Pedro Acosta. 2nd, 2 left, Marc Marquez. Mark scored well, obviously. I've just realised I was the biggest Mark skeptic. Hadn't noticed that until I looked at the spreadsheet just then. Josh was the biggest Marquez advocate. Josh put him 1st. Val put him 2nd. Simon and Megan put him 3rd, as did Glenn and Ollie. I put him only 4th. Let's start with the positive case. This is Josh's reasoning for putting Marquez 1st this year.
Marc Marquez is my rider of the year by a whisker. It's very easy when you're talking about Marc Marquez to underestimate or undervalue the scale of his achievements and the scale of the obstacles that he's had to overcome. Because, changing from a Honda to Ducati and then winning races and podiums, well, of course he was going to do that all very, very well because it's Marc Marquez. But we shouldn't underestimate the scale of that challenge because it was absolutely monumental. This was one of the worst years to be on a year-old Ducati. For once, the new bike was actually faster at the start of the year, and obviously the well-known troubles with the rear tyre as well on the year-old Ducati. So it was incredibly difficult, an incredibly steep learning curve, and he was just on the pace almost immediately. Some godly drives. I mean, Phillip Island, of course, comes to mind as just an exceptional, sort of sensational, sort of a get-up and applaud moment. And TV, as embarrassing that is, I think that's what I did when I had seen that race, because it's just you're just watching a genius, you're watching a legend. And there has been mistakes and crashes this year, which actually means that this probably isn't in the top 5 Marc Marquez seasons, but his level is so good that even if it's the 6th, 7th, 8th best Marc Marquez season, it's still, for me, that bit better than anybody else's. He's done just wonders on the year-old bike. I think if he's on the GP24, he wins the title, no doubt. And for me, that just completely elevates him above any other rider to come actually, fairly close to winning the title in the end. If a few things go differently, he's right up there. To finish ahead of Bastianini is just incredibly impressive. This is the precursor to him, I think, convincingly winning the title next year. And when he does, because I do think he will do that, I think we'll look back at this year and the performance step between the bike he's riding this year and the bike he's going to be riding next year and think, wow, okay, he did really, really good with the machinery he had, because it's going to be a whole new level next year, and his rivals, and Bagnaia in particular, really have to be ready, because I think they're about to be blown away.
So, 2 quick things on Josh's point. Firstly, Josh from F1, I knew you wouldn't get through a MotoGP podcast appearance without saying drives rather than rides at some point. That's why you're not allowed on here all the time. And also, I too stood up and applauded a Marc Marquez win in my house, probably in my kitchen, and that was his first win with Ducati, which was brilliant. I felt the Marquez storyline so much, with so much admiration, to come back from the injuries, to still be as good as he's been through all of that, to change bikes. So much about Marquez is just a brilliant story. His career is incredible. I've said loads of times, I think he was the best performer in all of motorsport in the 2010s, better than anybody in F1 at the time in terms of what he was achieving. I put him forth because I expected a bit more from him this season, even on that bike. So I'm saying that. Josh is saying he's the greatest by miles this year. Who put him second? Val, your take on Marquez this season?
Yeah, it's very aligned with Josh's to the point where, if I was in a slightly different mood, which is great methodology, I think after seeing him finish second in the Barcelona Sunday race, I would have found it very easily, and still do find it very easy, to justify P1 for him. I mean, the difference between the 2024 and the 23 is significant enough for me to make that case clear in my head. I think, there is a part of it, like perception-wise, he got away with some needless errors in a way that Pecco Bagnaia and Jorge Martin do not, by virtue of not having been in the very thick of the title fight, by virtue of, being an outsider. It doesn't elicit as much shock, as much deliberation, as much consternation, as much debate when he throws it down the road from the 3rd or 2nd or whatever, because those points weren't as pivotal, but also weren't necessarily regarded as gimmies like they sometimes were for Martin and Bagnaia. But I mean, every time the playing conditions were equalized, every time there was something that was negating the difference between the GP24s and the GP23s, he was at worst as good as the two of them. I know he spent the whole season saying that Martin and Bagnaia still have something extra on the Ducati regardless of the spec difference. 2025 will be the big proof of that, and Mark is certainly a much better authority on this than I am, but I don't believe him. And I don't buy it. I think he was better this season, but again, man, the margin for me is, it's minuscule.
Megan, he was 3rd for you. Was he ever any higher in your deliberation?
In my heart, yes. I wanted, I ummed and ahed about it. As I said before, my top 3 were very changeable. And I was like, maybe I should just put Mark number 1, because why not? But Val's point about the mistakes that people kind of didn't really pick up on. My dad watches races back later if he's been at work, and he would text me just Mark and then the facepalm emoji. And I think I got too many of those texts to put him number 1. There were times where you're like, oh, Mark, why? And early in the season, okay, it's Mark, why? But he's still kind of getting to grips with things. Later in the season, it was a bit come on. However, I did still consider putting him number 1 because of all of the reasons that everyone else has said. It's Mark. He did an amazing job. He was on the year-old bike. He could have easily been number one. I just decided to be a bit too sensible, and I think maybe I shouldn't have.
I just want to say, here's what swung it from number one to me. There were too many times this season where I was watching a qualifying session, I saw Mark grab a toe from Bagnaia or something like that, and then crash trying to maintain it for a full lap and compromise his grid position.
Yeah.
And the emotional reaction to that of just do it normally, just score the points that you have on offer, that was strong for many parts of the season. Ultimately, it's part of the Mark experience because, again, as I always say, you take that risk because with that risk also comes the fact that if there's a guy who you back to go from 12th on the grid to 3rd by the end of the opening lap, like almost every time, it's Mark, isn't it? That's a Mark thing. So it's part of the package. I understand that. And I don't think that the points he left on the table this season kept him from being a genuine championship contender. I think the spec difference was too much. But look, I don't know. I mean, in an alternate universe, I place him number one very easily. I think so.
I would have liked to have, and I think as well, like next year, obviously, I'm almost certain that he will be number one. But he's going to have to be now, because if anyone listens back and hears that I said that, then... But I think I don't think, as Val said, I don't think he was going to win the championship, however nice that would have been from a story perspective. But I think he did such a great job. The other thing I really liked about Mark this year was the fun side of Mark that we got to see.
Definitely.
Being with Grassini, being in that environment, he just seemed really chipper, and on his personal social media as well. Like, he posted a lot more fun stuff, and I like that. He gets points for that as well.
Yeah, Simon, you've said a few times in this podcast that you'll actually miss the satellite team version of Mark because you can't see that continuing in factory colours.
Yeah, he has been a different character this year. He's been much easier to work with. Looks like he's enjoying life much more. I feel like the only thing to do is to justify why he's not higher in my rankings, because I don't think that we need to really explain why he's as high as he is. But Megan nailed it. There was just one too many of those facepalm moments where he did something a bit dumb that kind of marked him down for me. But, over and all, the year has just been as we expected. It's been what we expected. He's been super strong.
Yeah, the errors as well. Go on, Megan.
Going back to Fabio Quartararo, I would have really liked to have seen Fabio Quartararo at Grassini this year on that bike and seen how he did.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even though I put Fabio higher... So, actually, this is a really good point. I put Fabio second. I put Marquez fourth. I don't think Fabio would have done a better job on the Grassini Ducati than Mark did. It's just that I felt Fabio Quartararo didn't leave as much on the table as Marquez did through the errors this year. That was the big thing for me.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, I think, Val, you mentioned the comeback rides from the poor grid positions.
Yes.
And one of the things that Ed Straw in our F1 rankings often gets quizzed about is when he marks a driver down for a mistake, and then that driver comes back from that mistake, charges to the field from either they've blown qualifying or they've gone off the road early or something. And we get readers and listeners going, that's so unfair. They charged from 17th to 3rd. And Ed's point is always, they shouldn't have been 17th in the first place.
Yeah.
That was their fault. And I think that kind of thing came into... As much as I loved Marquez's amazing first laps, there's still a part of me going, just stay upright in qualifying.
Yeah.
Especially, like you guys say, later in the season when both him and Acosta their mistakes were coming at a weird time.
Yeah.
So, process of elimination, our number one is the world champion, Jorge Martin, which, frankly, early in the vote, it didn't like it might be, given how all over the place the scoring was. But in the end, quite a dominant win on points. Me, Simon, Ollie, Megan and Glenn all put Martin first in our list. Val and his bestie Josh put him fourth. So before Val justifies why the only world champion ever on a satellite bike in the MotoGP era was only fourth, here is Josh justifying that.
You're probably wondering why on earth is the world champion only number 4 on my list. And it's a fair question. It was a pretty heat-of-the-moment decision, but it is one I stand by, and I do think there's a little bit of logic behind it as well. So you guys have explained really well that Ducati has tried to give as good a parity as possible across Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia this year. They've really kind of closed the gap between the satellite and factory rider to the point where it sort of takes off a little bit of the shine of a satellite rider finally winning a championship in terms of the scale of that achievement. It's still an incredibly impressive feat, unprecedented, and Jorge Martin has done a fantastic job to get the title over the line. But I think because that gap is now closed between factory and satellite rider, it's not a sort of, okay, guaranteed they are the rider of the season. He was the best rider of the 4 riders who had a 2024 Ducati, that is no doubt. He did a better job than Pecco Bagnaia and was a worthy champion and ranks above him in my list. But for me, there were 3 riders with lesser machinery of varying degrees who over the season were generally more impressive to me. And it's a very slim margins. There's not much of a gap at all between them because his season was insanely good. And I think it shows the quality of the other seasons, but I'm even putting it 4th because I still rate it extremely highly. I think, with any top 10, it's easy to be influenced by the machinery because, the riders with the best machinery are always going to have the best chance of taking the number 1 spot. But, realistically, there are only 4 riders who could have ever achieved this. I say realistically, there's 4 riders who had the machinery to do so. I wouldn't say that, I'd say 3 of them could have maybe won a title in different circumstances. And that same logic of taking into account the machinery may well, play in Martin's favour when I'm doing my list next year, because I think he's going to be, unfortunately far from the front, far from the title fight, but will still do, I think, a really impressive job. And I think he'll actually move the goalpost for what we expect from an Aprilia rider next year. He's that good. He's undoubtedly one of MotoGP's best riders, but for me, not the rider of the season.
Val, similar kind of turf for you?
You know what? I love that you introduced Josh at the start as somebody who only vaguely watches MotoGP occasionally once in a blue moon. And then his race ranking basically aligns with mine, almost 90% or something.
I thought he'd just come on here to slate Brad Binder, and then he said, he sends these notes. So good stuff, Josh.
That's very as I could sign under basically all of that. The only thing that I would disagree with is Josh's apologetics for not putting the champion higher. There should not be any apologetics of. I would like to make my approach here clear. The champion does not have a God-given right to be number 1 in my rankings. I'm not saying that's why you guys put Jorge Martin number 1. I'm just saying I also suspect that Jorge Martin would rather be number 1 in the MotoGP standings at number 1 in my rankings. I have a slight suspicion in my head that that's the case, but I don't think it's necessarily axiomatically true that even 90 or 80% of the time the best rider of the season in modern MotoGP wins the title. I don't know that I believe it. And this season, Jorge Martin was really good. Again, the case for number 1, I think is the case for number 1 is the same case that I used to put him 1 place over Pecco Bagnaia, which is it's still not a factory team. It's a satellite team. There's slight disadvantages there, even if Ducati has done everything it could to ensure parity. Everything it had to do to ensure parity. I would be surprised if it went truly above and beyond, but it did a lot. He scored well. He points raced well. He was consistently one of the fastest riders on track. He made a few mistakes, but whatever, over a 40 race season that will come. But that does not make it a clear number 1 for me.
Megan, you go first with your case for the defence of Jorge Martin as number 1, not just in the championship, but in the races rankings as well.
I feel like there was a bit of that. I feel like I should put him first, so I've put him first influence. I think Val's got a point there. But as I've said several times, my top 3 could have been in any order. Ultimately, Jorge Martin did win the championship. He beat the reigning 2-time champion. He put in a lot of very, very good performances. He didn't throw it down the road as much as he has done in the past. And I think that I personally have been quite guilty of saying, oh, well, it should have been Pecco's championship, but he made too many mistakes. Jorge Martin deserves a lot of credit for what he did this year. And especially on Saturdays, he's always amazing on Saturdays. This new format has really suited him. He'd put in some amazing performances on Sundays. And the thing that towards the end of the season as well that he deserves credit for is something that he hadn't done before, where he's gone, I should accept 2nd or 3rd here and not crash. I should accept 2nd and 3rd here and not pit because I think that the rain is going to get heavier and I could win this race if I do so. So I think that maturity as well got him a lot of credit when it came to me deciding my rankings. It could have been Pecco, it could have been Mark, it could have been Jorge, but ultimately he won the championship, so that kind of edged it for me.
Simon?
He improved this year. That fundamentally for me is the reason why he's top of it, because he identified weaknesses that cost him the championship last year and he fixed them. And I think that level of personal growth is quite rare and quite impressive. All the mistakes that he made last year didn't happen this year. All the times that we thought, oh, this is danger zone for Martin of old, who is absolutely going to crash in this position. He didn't. He finished the race. He went into the last weekend and it was prime opportunity for him to do something really stupid that he would have in the past, like running second with no one to fight against and getting distracted and falling off. And he didn't do it because he's improved this year. And I think, more than anything else for me this year, that has been the standout from him. He hasn't been any less aggressive. He hasn't been any slower. He's maybe picked his battles a little bit better, but I think picking his battles also tends to lead to those distractions and those mistakes. So he also hasn't picked his battles on occasion and had proper scraps whenever the sensible thing to do on paper would have been something else. All in all, I never even considered anyone else the top spot, and it's not just because he was the champion. It's because he earned the title by addressing why he didn't earn the title last year.
Yeah, for me, the satellite riders don't win championships thing weighs heavily here, because as much as we've all mocked you for that on the podcast over the last couple of years, Simon, I still believe it to a degree as well. Until he actually got it over the line and did it, I still had a big doubt, how could this actually be possible given the relative size of the teams, all the points about resources and just things you've said before, Simon, about how a satellite team is even travelling and how knackered they are at the end of the season after the flyaways versus a factory team that's staying in more comfort. I thought all that would weigh into the speed of the bike more as well, but also, by the way, satellite riders can't win championships. The T-shirt that we created, thanks to the listeners of this podcast, has sold extremely well. We had some updates on that yesterday. It made me very proud. Thank you for your support on that. If you still want one, shop.the-race.com. There are still plenty to be bought. We'll keep making them all the time. You want them. Good Black Friday discounts applying this week as well in the race shop. But yeah, he got it over the line as a satellite rider, and that impressed me hugely. Ultimately, the point of this is to win the championship. And he went about points racing in a very sensible way. He bagged the podiums. He did what he needed to do to win the thing that everyone is there to win. But he did that while also throwing his bike at Bagnaia in some brilliantly bold moves when everything was on the line. And he pulled it off safely. He made it work. He knew he was willing to battle hard when he didn't necessarily have to, but he knew when to stop. Such an impressive performance from the guy who had not been in that high pressure position before, from the guy who was in a team that shouldn't have been in that position. So enormous admiration for it, and that's why he was my number one. And I'm very glad he ended up number one on this list, even though a mischievous part of me would have loved it if Quartararo had ended up top of this list. And I'm glad that in general this list does not match the points. I think the champion might be the only person who's in the same place in this list as they are in the championship standings, and frankly, all 7 of us should be very proud of that, because what is the point of one that mirrors the championship standings? Thank you, Val, Simon, Megan, Ollie, Glenn, and Josh as well. Thank you, listeners, for your patience through this as well. I'll put the full scores breakdown in the community section on Patreon for the Race Members Club, so you can knock it around a little bit there and admonish or praise us as you wish. We've got loads more coming up for you over the winter, both in this main feed podcast and in the members club. We'll start digging a bit further down the grid as well over the next few weeks into some of the stories that this world title fight has not eclipsed in our hearts, but eclipsed in terms of podcast time. So we'll be back in your ears next week, just digging into some of the tougher stories in the midfield, I think, next.
The Athletic.